Prisoners of Geography is a work of contemporary geopolitics by the British author Tim Marshall. First published in 2015, it became an immediate bestseller in Britain and the USA, and in 2025 it was fully revised and updated. It now includes events up to and even after President Trump's inauguration this January. Before we go any further, I should mention that the publisher sent me a free copy in exchange for an honest review. I had intended to review it anyway, but I'm glad I waited. In many ways, it's a unique book, not written for specialists, but providing crucial information about the world for anyone who's interested in their place in it and who wants to know why international affairs are the way they are. I'm not saying the reader has to agree with every bit of it, or even any of it. I'll come to that later. The revised version is over 100 pages longer than the original. It consists of 10 chapters, and each explains how the historic and recent behaviour of today's nations has been conditioned by their geography. The first chapter, Russia, gives a good indication of the sort of thing I mean. Marshall points out that modern Russia grew out of an East Slavic settlement in 9th century Kiev, which after attacks by the Mongols relocated northeast to Moscow. The problem was Moscow was indefensible. There were no mountains, no deserts, and few rivers. In all directions lay flatland, and across the steppe to the south and east were the Mongols. The invader could advance at a place of his choosing. The Muscovite solution, starting with Ivan the Terrible, was to ruthlessly capture and subjugate the surrounding territory in order to create a buffer zone. Once they'd conquered nearly everything to the east, they turned to the west. The North European plain begins in France and remains flat all the way to Moscow. Marshall tells us that if there were some mountains in Ukraine, a Western attack on Russia wouldn't be so easy, and therefore possibly tempting. As it is, he adds, Putin has no choice. He must at least attempt to control the flatlands to the west. Hence the invasion of Ukraine. Chapter 2 deals with China and gives a good explanation of why China feels it must control Tibet. Tibet sources China's 3 principal rivers, the Yellow, the Yangtze and the Mekong, and it provides a buffer against one of China's many enemies, India, and also why it's launched a genocide in Xinjiang. The chapter on the USA explains how that country was founded and puts its changing demographic in the context of that history, particularly how that might affect future relations with Mexico. Africa's struggle to develop is ascribed partly to its rivers, hardly any of which are navigable, its coastline, which is unusually devoid of good harbours, and colonialism, which inflamed and sometimes created ethnic divisions. There's a consideration of the continent's individual countries, their relations to one another, and their future prospects. The section on the Middle East is probably the book's most pessimistic. Liberal democracy is not about to break out there, the author tells us. Indeed, in many Middle Eastern countries, the use of political violence to gain or maintain power remains the norm. The book ends with a look at the Arctic, which contains a vast reservoir of oil and gas and possibly a host of precious metals, but where Russia seems to be ahead of the USA and Europe, which may help explain why President Trump is so eager to incorporate Greenland and Canada. The conclusion looks briefly at space, a topic on which Marshall has written another book. Is 2023 the future of geography? In my view, Prisoners of Geography is required reading for any person who takes his or her role as a citizen of a globalised world at all seriously. My main criticism would be that it can read a little too deterministically in places, as if this is the geographical hand this leader has been dealt, so naturally they must behave this way, when obviously there are choices. Putin might well be obliged to lie awake at night worrying about the North European plain, but he didn't have to invade Ukraine. So why did he? The explanation surely lies in his personality, which probably also applies in different contexts to China's President Xi, the USA's President Trump, and Turkey's President Erdogan, to name just a few. There's quite a revealing discussion of Brazil in Chapter 9. It is, Marshall tells us, by nature non-confrontational, its foreign policy is against intervention in other countries, and war with any of its neighbours seems highly unlikely. There is a dormant frontier dispute with Uruguay, but both sides seem to take the view that it can be sorted mañana, and if not, perhaps the mañana after that. But the author has earlier told us that southeastern Brazil, where it borders with Uruguay, is its most hospitable region for agriculture and human habitation. Surely a few maps showing North Uruguayan village names in Portuguese and a few ominous military manoeuvres on the border would be to Brazil's advantage. Luckily for Uruguay, Brazil doesn't have Putin, Xi or Trump in charge, which shows there are always many ways of responding to geography. We don't have to remain locked into belligerent 19th century mindsets. So, in conclusion, while I'd say that this book is indispensable, it shouldn't be used as a description of how things must be. Rather, it should be used as a basis for discussion of how things might be different, and even how they ought to be. I'm pretty sure the author would agree.